Okay, welcome back. I hope you've had a nice lunch and you're feeling refreshed, and we have some lovely speakers for you in the afternoon. Our continued thanks to Sarah for doing such a wonderful job this morning. Thank you very much, Sarah, and we look forward to your contribution. Yes, a round of applause is good. And I'd like to thank Star Systems at the back too for their wonderful facilitation. Thank you, folks. Now, as we move along, it's my great pleasure to introduce you to Michael Brophy. And Michael, you might have known for some years, has been with us in terms of setting up this conference. And Michael will be contributing a little bit about our friend Sean, who we lost during the year. I say our friend, and I say his brother and confidant. And also, Michael did have the loss of his wife as well during that time. So we're very grateful for Michael's contribution today, which will be really personal to him. And just to introduce you a little bit to Sean, Sean was one of the founder members of the group. He was an electronic engineer who did construct psychology and did organizational psychology as a PhD. And throughout his lifetime had lived with a chronic illness, but contributed in the most flourishing way over many, many years. So I'd like to hand you over now to Michael. Michael is a very established man in his own respect, and I refer you to his profile in the pack. I met Michael when he was an investigator with the Office of the Ombudsman, and he has chaired many positions, including being a member of the Medical Council. He's also now chair of the National Patients Forum, and he's been the Irish representative for Hearts and Healthcare over many years. So without further ado, we'd like to introduce you to Michael Brophy, please.
Thanks very much, Mary. Thanks very much. You will appreciate that I can't be objective about what I'm going to talk about. Yeah, my brother Sean, he was born in the mid-1940s, so at the middle of the last century. And he was born with congenital scoliosis and lived in a tenement in Dublin, 4 families living in the house, one on each floor, one toilet out the back for everybody. So he could have disappeared without a trace. He could have, for anybody disabled at that time, the aim, the goal was to get them a nice little job. And that was as much of their potential as it was thought that they might have. But he bucked the trend. He became an accomplished classical piano player. He an electronic engineer, a psychologist, a philosopher, a historian, a spiritual director. And because of his interaction with the health service, over his lifetime, he had 80 admissions to hospital over his lifetime. So he figured that the only way he could manage this was to become his own expert patient. So to have his own knowledge and his own, so he'd have his medical records would always be with him. And so he could tell the doctor when he went in, the doctor would say, I'll give you a dose of Clapin. He'd say, no, you won't. have a read of the medical notes there. They say you'll leave me with tendinitis for weeks if you do that, you know. So I want to talk to you on 2 strands. One is his take as an expert patient, and the other thing, he wouldn't let me out of here if I didn't recite some of his poetry, because that's what he wanted to be defined as, a poet. And I was in Glasnevin Cemetery last week organising his headstone, and on it will go Sean Brophy, Filla. For those visitors, Filla is the Gaelic word for poet. So that's how it goes. So as an expert patient, he had scoliosis, then he lost a kidney, and then one of his lungs stopped functioning properly, you know. So he would began to observe what was going on around him. What was the difference when a certain nurse came into the room, or a doctor came into the room, or tea lady came into the room, that would give his heart a little lift? And he defined it as they all were acting out of their humanity rather than just doing a job. He defined them as having a calling, and he was very careful not that wouldn't get mixed up with the word vocation, because the word vocation has got a bad name now in terms of, say, the nursing profession, how you were treated because you had a vocation. You got low pay, you worked long hours, you did terrible work, you know. So these were people, and he said that any job can become a calling, and any calling can become a job. It depends on the attitude of the individual involved. Okay. And so I can give you a practical example of what he meant by that. Because he was his own expert patient, he'd know when from his stats and everything, if he was beginning to deteriorate, and that the only way he could manage was to get intravenous drips. The only way we could do that was to go in through the A&E system at the time. And so we knew what was going to happen. We were going to be there for hours and hours. You get the drips, fine, I'd be home again, you know. So when he'd ring me and he'd say, I'm going down, and I'd say, okay, I'll be down to you now. And then he rang me one New Year's Eve, and I said, oh, don't ring me now. But we went into Beaumont, and we were lucky. He got a trolley, and he got a little cubicle, and because we knew what was going to happen, he would have writing materials with him. So some of his poetry he'd write when he was there. I would have a book with me that I'd been threatening to read for a long time because I knew I was going to be there. So I was reading, he was writing. And there was a young nurse operating in front of us. And I say young, I mean, they're all young to me now. So I don't know what age she was, maybe mid-20s. No, she was younger than that, you know. And she had three individuals. One was a young man who'd been brought in by his friends, having had a fall and hit his head. And he woke up on the trolley and wanted to leave. And she was really adamant that he would not leave because she needed to keep him there. There was another fellow who had his hand covered in blood with a towel wrapped around it, roaring and shouting to be treated. I want to be treated now, you know. And then this little old man who was a patient in St. Dita's Hospital, which was a mental facility at the time, who had been let out for New Year's Eve, got drunk, ended up in A&E, and wanted to talk about his mother, right? So there she is, she's handling the three of these, you know, and she turned around, she looked at me, and she came over to me, and she said, if I bring him over, will you talk to him about his mother? Absolutely brilliant. Absolutely brilliant, you know. I was a girl now who was living and working out of for humanity, okay. Other things that he determined was that your experience as a healthcare professional, and he defined healthcare professional as anybody who works in healthcare, from a doctor, consultant, down to the porter at the door. Anybody who works in healthcare and does their best, even when they don't feel up to it. That was his definition of a healthcare professional. Okay. So your experience as a healthcare professional has a direct effect on the care experience of the patient. So how you feel about your work has a direct effect on how the patient is going to experience the care you're going to deliver to him or her. And Patrick Ryan said that this morning. You have to put a value on yourself. The doctor, the consultant who was here, was talking this morning. I noticed on her slide, one of her slides, she had Lee's Cross. Now, I was involved in the aftermath of Lee's Cross. I was also involved in the aftermath of Ars Attracta, 10 years apart. And myself and Sean came to the conclusion, and I still believe about it, the problem in those institutions was, A, lack of leadership. And the second thing was, the staff were not putting a value on themselves. And if you're not putting a value on yourself, it's very difficult for you to put a value on the people you're caring for. And the value I'm talking about now is not, is it Lancome? Because you're worth it. No. It's a true value that you are a valuable human being. You're unique. There's nobody like you before. There will never be anybody like you again. You have a role and a purpose to fulfill that only you can do, you know. And Sean used to say, And don't categorize yourself. And don't categorize the people you're caring for. Not the bed, soft pagan, bed 2, or whatever it is like that, you know. He said, you're not a human having. So don't define yourself by what you possess. You're not a human doing. So don't define yourself by the role you're carrying out in healthcare. Because it's only a role. You're not a doctor or a nurse. You're a human being practicing medicine. So you're not a human having, you're not a human doing, you are a human being. And the being he divided up into 2 sections. One was your being as an existential organism, so you're alive. And the second part of it was your being as a person, flourishing and developing all the days of your life. He used to say, he was a very spiritual man, as when I read one or two of his poems, you'll come to understand. But he used to say, I don't really think there's a St. Peter up there with a book when we get up there, you know. But he said, if there was, he wouldn't be asking what sins you committed or what sins you didn't commit. He'd ask you, why didn't you become the person you had the potential to be? So, okay. So, the other aspect was, as a patient, then he firmly believed that in healthcare, the conversation is the relationship. It's the conversation between you and the person you're caring for is the actual relationship. And he took this concept from Oprah Winfrey. On her last day, Oprah was talking about all the people she had on her couch, and there was thousands of them, you know. And she said, if I was to encapsulate them all, she said, it would be this. They're asking 3 questions. And these are the 3 questions that your patients are asking you. Do you see me? Do you hear me? Does anything I say mean anything to you? You know, great rule of thumb. And finally, coming into his older age, he used to say that I'm not growing old. I'm just older and growing. Just before I come on to his poetry, just on the day he died, I was very fortunate to be there. So fortunate because I was just on the point of leaving to go home and come back an hour later, and for some reason I didn't, you know. And he knew he was dying, and one of his requests was that he wouldn't be sedated to the extent that you wouldn't know what was happening. He didn't want the pain, but he didn't want to be out of it, you know. And the last thing he told me, which and afterwards he was teaching me on that last day, you know, was he was the most resilient man, very hopeful, but it wasn't a wishful sort of hoping. He said, hope to me, he said, is the absolute certainty, the utter conviction that whatever the events of my life, whatever adversities I may have to face, I find a way to make sense of them and find a way to get over them. Right. I took that back to my mother-in-law because my mother-in-law lived with myself and Rita for 20 years. But after Rita died, she had to go to a nursing home because I couldn't manage her anymore by myself. And so I'd go around at night time to her. She's 96. She's almost blind, can hardly hear. And I encapsulated that, so she had a lot of time to think about Rita, you know. I encapsulated that definition into a prayer. So every night she prays, Lord, give me the grace of having the absolute conviction, the utter certainty that whatever the events of my life, whatever the adversities I have, you will help me to find a way to make sense of them and help me to find a way to get over them. Yeah. So if I turn to his poetry now, and they're all about women, they're snippets from his poem. I left 2 books there for you today. One is on compassion. It's on the compassion of Christ in the haiku format, which is a little Japanese couplet. 3 lines, I think about 12 syllables, and they capture the essence of a concept or an idea. So you'll see that. The introduction is a great piece of writing on spirituality. And the other book then is what he called turning points. These are these points in his life where things happened which changed and helped them to change, you know. And so these women, who the first I call three women with a calling. So as a young boy, Sean, he was brought to the orthopaedic hospital in Clontarf in Dublin for the scoliosis. And part of his treatment included being wrapped in a plaster of Paris, covering his entire body from the top of his head to his knees, and then deposited in a bed where he remained for 8 months. Every week a doctor would come along and wrench a turnbuckle on the side of the plaster in an attempt to shape his developing spine. In the course of these months, three women stood out as having what he later defined as a calling, working out of their humanity as distinct from merely doing a job. One was the matron who arranged for his bed to be raised so that he could see out through a picture window. Another was a nurse who visited him every other day, even when she was off duty, and treated him like her own child. And the third was a teacher who taught him to love literature and picked out books for him to read every day for the 8 months. And she is encapsulated in these few lines of his poetry. His teacher patiently led him to view his subjects with excitement. Undiminished by his vertical gaze, he discovered the thrills of Biggles and Billy Bunter. He never forgot those women or those attributes of love, literature and beauty which became embedded in his philosophy for the rest of his life. The next woman I called the woman next door. In the late 1940s, TB was rampant in the tenements of Dublin, and our mother lost 4 sisters to the disease, and finally got the dreaded diagnosis herself. So what was to become of Sean and I during that period? Into the gap stepped Mary Burton, the woman next door. She was a single woman, a domestic, who lived in the back rooms of our small artisan's residence. For the period of my mother's recovery, she cared for myself and Sean and saved us the incarceration in institutional care with all the implications that might have had for us. Sean remembered her decades later and dedicated a book of poetry to her. The woman next door was old, when all around me looked old. Still, she seemed to have a gaiety, a fun-provoking grip on life, her twin eyes alive with mischief, in keeping with the anarchy of a young boy's mind. Sitting close to the turf fire, I dined on stories of balaclava and other foolish heroism. Sean later said that Mary Burton made the important feel humble and the lowly proud, another set of characteristics that underpinned the rest of his life. The next woman, I have it under the heading of a small village in the Pyrenees. At the age of 9, Sean won a competition in a Sunday newspaper for a place on the Dublin pilgrimage to Lourdes. Nobody admitted to entering his name, but we all knew it was our mother. So off he went in 1952 in the charge of strangers, seen off by his entire extended family, who waved to him from the pier in Dunleary as the mailboat set off on the first leg of his odyssey to Lourdes, instigating a family tradition of service with the Dublin Lourdes hospitality, which has now extended over 60 years and 3 generations. In Lourdes, she fell under the spell of the visionary peasant Bernadette Subaru. Aside from her fame as a visionary, Bernadette suffered with great pain all of her adult life. From her, Sean drew the concept that whilst pain is inevitable in life, suffering is optional. And I remember long nights in Beaumont Hospital when he gave life to that attribute. His poem, Conversation with Saint Bernadette, is my personal favourite of all his poems. What have I received from life, the pilgrim asked. Whatever Christ sent you, Saint Bernadette replied. For everything done to you was done by Christ. And what has life received from you, Saint Bernadette asked. For whatever you did for Christ. Well, I found my place and filled it, the pilgrim replied. Then you did well, Saint Bernadette said with a smile. So keep your place and live in the peace of Christ forever. The last 2 women, I call them 2 magnificent women. For Sean, after 50 years as a bachelor, married a woman called Emily Carroll in 1999, after a great friendship of 35 years. And these few lines suggest the essence of their relationship. You understood that happiness came from giving love to another, from music, from painting, from writing, from real conversation. Each day that dawns, I see your gaze in your daughter's eyes. 5 weeks after the wedding, Emily was dead. Sean was bereft and thought the sun would never shine again. He threw himself into his writing and wrote a book on grief, book of poems on grief, which he entitled Elegy. His introduction to that is a masterclass in the new understanding of such grief, and also contains the following gem. Are you looking for me? I am in the next seat. When you really look for me, you will see me instantly. And I thought that was the end of his involvement with women. But then along came what I call the angel of the bonds, because Sean was in and out of the Bonds Hospital, and there was a lay chaplain in there. Her name was Fionnuala. And I came home to my own wife, Rita, one night, and I said, you know, if I didn't know any better, that fella is doing a line. It's Fionnuala this, Fionnuala that. Fionnuala says this, Fionnuala thinks that. And in 2011, they were married. And unfortunately, it's her who's now bereft now. But he wrote this poem for her at that time. There was a moment in which my life changed forever. You came into my sick room and we chatted like old friends. I saw your face etched with sadness, yet luminous in your oneness with God. I saw a patent honesty coupled with a mystery that was irresistible. Something told me that we had been here before, a sense of déjà vu. I couldn't name it, my language failed me, but my soul stirred. Thank you for loving me and for the privilege of loving you always. You light the way through the rest of my life, you lovely woman. The final piece I have is I call it In Memoriam, Sean, and I've cobbled it from some of his work. For such a short time, we had a loan of you. We valued you and we're enriched by the ways that you touched our lives, captured now in a mosaic of memories and freesia. And for all time, you are everywhere, and you touch us in every way. And we have to learn to touch you in our minds, keep you in our hearts and in our prayers forever. Thank you.
And I'm just going to pause for a moment to treasure our time. Thank you, Michael, for a very moving tribute. I think it's incredibly meaningful for all of us. And I hate to bring up a mundane thing after something so beautiful, but I am going to remind you that big sound that we heard was probably mobile phone interference. So if you haven't turned off your mobile, I would encourage you to do so to save any of us being scared again by such a sound. So with that, I will move on. And I think it's so fitting that Professor Sheila Payne is going to be speaking with us now on the heels of Michael's wonderful tribute to his brother. And as I put up your slides, Sheila, you can read her amazing biography. Sheila Payne is known throughout the world for her work in end-of-life and palliative care. But I think that one of the things that is really striking to me is the idea that, let me just, sorry, I'm trying to speak and toggle at the same time. There we are. What am I doing wrong to not bring up the menu of it there? Yeah. That. You know? Sorry for the technical interruption, but I will say that I met Sheila for the first time last night thinking, you know, I've read your work for so long and we have a close colleague in common. Thank you very much, Pork. I really appreciate it. that it's just a pleasure to meet somebody who drives home the message with genuine dedication to making the world a better place. So, Sheila, thank you for joining us.
Well, thank you for those kind words, and thank you very much for the invitation to speak here. I'm going to change the tone a bit. We've heard so many interesting talks today, but I'm going to be talking about research. So let's see if I can move us on. Oh, that's moved quite a long way on. Let's see if I can move back to that one. That's better. So what I'm going to talk about with you this afternoon is getting to think a bit about how we can improve care for frail older people living in residential nursing homes. We heard about hospital care this morning, about caring for people in a domestic home, but nursing homes is going to be the focus of my talk. I'm going to talk specifically about a project which is funded by the European Commission and involves 6 countries. The project is called PACE. And I'm going to talk specifically about an intervention which is designed to support staff who work in nursing homes to develop better palliative care. And I'm going to finish with a few reflections. So let's see if I can make this move. Yeah, there you go. So the first thing, because I know we've all had a lovely big lunch, is I want to keep you awake. So I want you to turn to your neighbour and just for 1 minute talk to each other about the one thing that you would like the staff to know if you were dying in a nursing home. Okay, great. Thank you for speaking with each other. Okay, I'm going to bring us back now. Shh. Okay. So, let's see. So the first thing is, did you introduce yourself? Because in healthcare, that's the most important thing. You need to say, my name is, so that you know who the person is talking to. So what did you find out? Anything surprising? You can tell me later. Okay, let's move on. So you are very well aware that there is a changing profile of populations across Europe and across many parts of the world. Japan is currently the country with the highest proportion of older people, but these are the projections in Europe. Interestingly, the very latest data is showing that longevity and each of us living longer and longer is likely to stall anyway in the UK, but maybe in other European countries too. And that's probably due to lifestyle choices. But that's not the topic of this talk. So what is the relevance? Why should I, as a person who works in palliative care, be invited to come and speak at a conference which is focusing on frail older people? Well, the WHO definition, and we've had some principles of it already this morning, really does emphasize these things here. And while many of you will be familiar with the WHO definition from 2002, there was also a very important World Health Organization Assembly resolution in 2014 that really advocated that governments strengthen palliative care as part of comprehensive healthcare planning throughout the life course. So what do we mean when we think about palliative care and early integration of palliative care alongside life-prolonging treatments? Now, this is quite a new model, particularly if you think of a North American perspective, where to get reimbursement, you need to relinquish life-prolonging treatments or potentially life-prolonging treatments. That's not the case in the UK. You can continue to have palliative care and other treatments running alongside together. So in this model, if we think of the line, the black line there is about the frailty, the trajectory of illness. So ultimately, the decline, whatever the condition you have. And most of us will die of some sort of chronic condition with some type of organ failure, may or may not be with dementia, but functional status will decline. And specifically, we need to think about a general palliative care approach, which is patient-centred and family-focused, and not just specialist palliative care provision. So if we think more about palliative care for frail older people, what does it define as? It is about an active, compassionate approach that treats, comforts and supports older people who are living with and dying from progressive and chronic life-threatening conditions. And sometimes it's really hard to know when they go from living with to dying from, and they may chop and change. So it's unlikely to be a single linear downward trajectory. It's likely to be some exacerbations. And many of you who work very much more closely with the older people than I do will be aware that bringing the family together for that final meeting only to have the older person happily sitting up in bed the following morning eating breakfast. Does that sound familiar? Okay. And that, you don't think of that as a problem. That is the way it is. And so prognostication can be very, very difficult. But what we should be focusing on are the personal aspects, physical and psychological, the cultural things that are important, and we all have culture. In the UK, most English people tend to think everybody else has culture except from themselves, you know. It's what black and ethnic minority people have. But of course, we all have culture. And what does spiritual or existential mean in the context of that person? And as we've heard already, human beings are social animals, so families and friends and others are important. And the delivery of care should include a period of time, and with something like dementia, that will be many, many years. So I'm not talking about just end of life, the last few hours, days and weeks of life, but a much more extended period and into bereavement supporting families. So I'm going to start now by introducing the PACE project. So that was the context which we started from. And I want to acknowledge Professor Lieve van der Blok from Belgium, from Brussels, who is the leader of the consortium. And this is a consortium meeting. We bring together many different universities, organizations like the World Health Organization, the EAPC, which is the European Association for Palliative Care, and Alzheimer's Europe, and other advocacy groups for older people. Bizarrely, we seem to be standing under a dead tree in Helsinki there, but this was a consortium meeting, and believe it or not, that was an artwork. So what was our project about? What were we trying to do? So it's a 5-year project. We're in to almost the last year, not quite the last year. It has 3 phases. The first thing we set out to do was to map palliative care provision in long-term care facilities, so not in hospices or in specialist palliative care units or in hospitals, but in long-term care facilities, and I'll tell you a little bit about that. Then we went on to do the next study, which was a retrospective analysis of deceased residents in long-term care facilities in 6 countries. And then we did a cluster randomized controlled trial of a particular intervention that I will tell you about. So what are the countries that took part and why did we choose them? So we have 6 countries, and these are some flags of the countries that are involved. We chose 3 countries where palliative care, and particularly specialist palliative care, was quite well developed. It was already well integrated into healthcare systems, and there was legislation and support through the health service already for it, and 3 countries where it was less well integrated. Not that it was not existent, that's not true. It had already existed, but it was not part of regular healthcare provision. So the 3 countries that already had palliative care services was the UK, the Netherlands and Belgium. And those where there was less well-integrated services was Finland, Poland, and Slovenia. No, Italy. I've got that wrong. Another project was Slovenia, Italy. So the first thing we did was, when you're starting anything, you need to know what's happening out there. What is the situation in Europe at the time we started 4 years ago? And my colleague, Professor Catherine Froggatt, who works with me at Lancaster University, led an EAPC task force, which was a development from a previous task force that she'd always done, which started to map this, the organisation of care. So we collected data from 29 countries in Europe, and we asked, and those are the list of countries, I'm not going to read them out. These are not just European Union countries, these are broader than that. We were interested in how palliative care was delivered in the nursing home sector. And that's where the first complication arose. So what exactly did we mean by nursing homes? And one of the first things and one of the first outputs that we had from this mapping work is that we realized that when we talked about nursing homes, actually we mean really very, very different things in different countries, with different funding mechanisms, different expectations, and so on. And we produced a typology. This is published. You can go, a paper by Catherine Froggatt now gives you much more detail on this if you're interested. But we had this categorization between 3 types. So basically, on-site medical, nursing, and care staff. And that's called type 1, and you'll see those kind of nursing homes in the Netherlands, for example. Type 2, which is on-site nursing and care, but medical staff being off-site, GPs or others coming in to provide the care, but not being part of the nursing home team. And type 3, which is on-site nursing assistant staff, but specialists, but registered nurses and medical doctors work off-site. And in the UK, we have type 2 and type 3, and I'm sure you can work out for yourselves what types you have. I know from some previous research I did in the Republic of Ireland that I think you have about 4 types of nursing homes here. So how many older people in the population of each of the countries that we looked at? Well, you can see that around about 20% 20% is about quite common. So you'll see 20% or over 20% in Italy and Germany, down to countries like Turkey with very low proportions of older people. In Ireland, you probably know that you're a relatively young country in terms of your population, and you have around about 12% when we collected this data. And the need, so this is a little bit more information across the countries that we had data for. Not all countries was it at all easy to collect this information. So the need for palliative care in nursing homes was the percentage of deaths in nursing homes. And you'll see that in Finland, it's a very, very common place to die. Over 60% of their population die in nursing homes, down to places like Cyprus, where it's very uncommon, just about 10%, and Spain. In the UK, it's the area of care which has been rising most rapidly. So in the UK, it's just under 20% at the moment, but with a very steep rise in the number of people who would be expected to die there in the future. So what about palliative care provision in nursing homes? And we categorise it into three big groups. None at all, and you can see that quite a few countries fall into that group. Minimal, some, and you'll be glad to know, a widespread in Ireland and a few other countries. But if you think about the needs and the proportion of people dying there, how important that area is likely to be. So that was our baseline, trying to map out what was happening in Europe. So the next thing we did was we tried to do an analysis of the quality of dying in a nursing home. Now, unfortunately, we couldn't actually ask the people who were dying or had deceased, but we asked the staff, their relatives, the managers of the homes. So that's what we did next. And this is our sample. So we collected data on 1,707 deaths. People needed to have died within the previous 3 months in the nursing home. And that was drawn from over 300 nursing homes in the 6 countries. And these just give us the response rate. So we talked to the facility manager, the staff member, the relative, and the treating physician about each person. So we collect data about actual people, not just generally, how do you provide that care? So, so this is our deceased residents' characteristics. The mean age was 85, so that doesn't surprise you. Probably you're fully aware nursing homes cater for older people. But 32% were over 90 years of age. So we are talking about the old. Most are women. Majority of residents with dementia, but there was a huge range. The lowest proportion was in the UK with 60%, and the highest was in Finland at 83%. So with 83% of the residents, that's a large proportion. What about the quality of dying? Now this is a staff rating. So we asked staff about what they judge to be the quality of the person, that named person, the quality of their death. And you'll see that really there's not much variation. So the higher the score, the better the quality of dying. That's the first thing I should say. Slightly better in the UK, slightly worse in Poland. But overall, not much difference. But if you kind of think about it, overall, this is not good quality dying. So overall, these are not good deaths. What about quality of end-of-life care according to the family members, those who witness the dying? So once again, very little variation here. Slightly higher in the UK, but not much difference. Finland and Poland, interestingly, about the same. We have, there's a limit to how much of the data I'm going to present to you. I'm just giving you a little flavour of the data that we have, and you can imagine there'll be a lot of publications coming out. One of the things that if you deliver good quality palliative care, you need to have is a multidisciplinary team. And we looked to see if there was a multidisciplinary team meetings in the nursing homes. That doesn't mean to say that they employed all those staffs, but did they bring them together? And in some countries there were, and interestingly here, the United Kingdom actually didn't do so well. So only in 40% of the care homes. In the Netherlands and Finland, much higher levels, having multidisciplinary teams. So that tells you a little bit about the retrospective analysis study. But what we wanted to do was improve the care. And one way you do that is you put in an intervention. And the intervention that we wanted to test had already been designed in the UK, but we needed to adapt it for European context. And it was called the PACE Steps to Success intervention. And this is the team, some of my colleagues at Lancaster. And in each country, we had a country trainer, somebody who was very knowledgeable, went into the care homes and worked with the staff. So it was a development and educational intervention, and I'm going to tell you a bit more about that intervention. So we wanted to design this intervention, which had previously been designed and tested in the UK, but not used outside. We wanted to do a cross-cultural adaptation, which recognised that situations were different in different countries, and culture and language were also different, and expectation. And then we wanted to implement the intervention, see if we could implement it. You can design all sorts of great things sitting in your university office, but can you actually get them to work outside? And we used a cluster randomized control trial to test it. So this was the original intervention. It had been, as I say, developed as part of the English End-of-Life Care programme. It's available. You can download it if you want. But we took that as the basic foundation to then develop our own. And what we were trying to do was introduce a palliative care approach into long-term care facilities. And we did that in 6 steps over a 6-month period. And I'm just going to run through the steps with you. And I'll tell you and explain each of these steps a little bit more as we go. But the first step is about discussion and a review of the future, discussion of the current residents, assessment and review, coordination of care, delivery of high quality care, care in the last days of life, and care after death. So let's have a look at each of those steps. It may be well that your nursing home, if you work in a nursing home, may well be doing some of these things already. So in step 1, we helped people to just understand the concept of palliative care and advanced care planning. Lots of people who are unfamiliar with palliative care say, oh, that's something to do with cancer, it doesn't apply to older people, or it doesn't apply if you have dementia, or we couldn't possibly do it here. Or you think it's only about pain control and anything else doesn't matter. that's not true. So we try to introduce the concept, and we try to introduce the idea of advanced care planning, helping people to think about what they would like for their future, what their preferences and wishes are. And in some care homes, they were already doing that, and in some countries, absolutely not. So the whole notion of advanced care planning, for example, in Italy, is completely countercultural, because talking about death is really difficult. So to do those things, you need basic communication skills. And we introduced some communication skill training, and we introduced a tool to which, instead of calling it advanced care planning and everybody thinking that's all about resuscitation, we called it the looking and thinking ahead tool. So we tried to make it really sensible and easy for people to talk with families and with residents about. So the step 2 was about assessment and review. And what we tried to do is get people to have multidisciplinary meetings where they reviewed and assessed patterns of physical change in residents, all their residents. Because often they either said, well, of course, everybody in our care home is dying, so we don't need to do any of this because we know they're all dying. Or they failed to recognize dying until the person was moribund. So we needed to get somewhere between those two extremes. And we introduced a tool called mapping changes in condition. And the other thing is that because the trajectory is not like an acute trajectory, often older people fluctuate in their condition and deterioration is slow. So just getting familiar with thinking about doing assessment and getting and empowering staff to talk to and work very closely with residents, we felt was helpful. And step 3 is about good coordination of palliative care. So we asked them to introduce multidisciplinary team meetings involving people like the local GP, if the GP came in, the specialist palliative care nurse, if he or she came in. Now, this is actually a multidisciplinary care team from Taiwan who wasn't part of our study, but I thought this was a really good example because this is an example where the doctors and the nurses, the man nearest to me on this side is the psychologist. We have the Buddhist monk. She is there as the spiritual care advisor. So they're all, and the nurse who's wearing a pink jacket at the back, they're all there talking about the patients in their care, working together to find the best solutions, the best care plans. Step 4, this is delivery of high quality palliative care, symptom management. Now, of course, we recognize that older people can have many, many symptoms. But what we decided to do was make things simple and focus on the 2 symptoms that we were aware from the literature was the most poorly managed in the care home sector. And that's pain management and screening for depression. And you can criticize us for not looking at constipation and anxiety and all the other things that are important to people. But we felt that those were the things that would really make a difference. Step 5, care in the last days of life. So if we're going to enable people to be cared for and remain in care homes and not have to go to the hospital, they're very, very unlikely in the UK to ever go to a hospice because hospice beds are so under pressure. So what we wanted to do is empower the staff so they could manage non-complex end-of-life care and recognise when a person was moving into their last few days of life. And then in the last stage, step 6, we introduced a monthly reflective debriefing session, which was a death audit tool to help the staff reflect on their own needs, but also what happened in the deaths in the last months. Did we get it right? Could we have done it better? And drive that quality improvement. So we had many intervention resources. We produced information folders for various groups of staff. We had training folders. We ran a 2-day training program for coordinators. We funded people called PACE coordinators who went and taught in the nursing homes. In the nursing homes, we had people who acted as champions as well. So it was a very intensive period of development. So who got involved? Well, there were country trainers. So in each country, we had a leader. Often we actually appointed 2 because it's very good to allow for holidays and sick leave and things. Care home managers, coordinators, care home staff. We tried to reach out to physicians, GPs, and of course families. And this just shows the training that we did. So we implemented PACE over a 12-month period. So 2 months in preparation, 6 months in implementation, and 4 months in consolidation. And this is the cross-cultural adaptation that we used. We agreed on the content of all the materials. We got each of the countries to translate what was originally in English into the languages, but in a way that was acceptable and appropriate. We then reviewed it in each of the countries. We made some modifications, and then because we were running a trial, then we were ready for our trial. So the cluster randomized control trial is in progress. It's just finishing. In fact, this month it finishes. So does the intervention improve staff knowledge and attitudes? That's the question we asked. Does it improve end-of-life care in nursing homes, care homes? And our results, watch this space, our results will be available next year. So, coming on to the final part, I think to make this kind of change, we need to change cultures of care. I was judging some medical students debating end-of-life care last week. They did very, very well at the medical students. They debated topics like assisted dying and euthanasia and whether or not end-of-life care should be rationed. They talked about home care very knowledgeably and hospitals, and they knew about advanced care planning. They never once mentioned nursing homes. I did berate them for that at the end, as you can imagine. But actually, that's very typical of many societies. We fail to recognize how important end-of-life care for residents in nursing homes is, and I think it will become increasingly so. So we need to think about the support for family members during the transition, not only into end-of-life care and into bereavement. Help it just in the way that it's difficult for us as staff, it's very difficult for families. We need to really support staff working in nursing homes. If we're going to ask them to do this work, it is demanding. It causes them to really think and give of themselves. And we need to recognise and reward innovation in care. And I think we can do far more. That I don't know about in Ireland, but in the UK, nursing homes only ever hit the newspapers when something awful happens. We should have some prizes and awards for fantastic nursing homes because there are great work out there. But the most important thing is the leadership and management. You have to have the buy-in to sustain these innovations and support change. And I'm not going to give you the results, but where it has really failed, and I'm aware where it has really failed, particularly in the UK context, is where managers have either not been committed or there have been repeated changes over that 12-month period. So staff do not feel the support that is necessary to deliver this care, but to deliver this kind of change. So these are my reflections. Being involved in the PACE study for me has been a great, great privilege. It's very complex but fascinating work. I think nursing homes are increasingly going to be a place of end-of-life care. They already are in Finland, for example. And I think that is going to happen. Interestingly, they are increasingly becoming a place of care in Japan, in China, in countries that we don't think of as having large numbers of nursing homes. And to deliver that good quality care, we need to empower nursing home staff, and particularly managers. We need to also increase the confidence and skills of GPs and physicians, because if they panic and send the person who has some complication immediately to hospital, any amount of care, staff training to nurses is not going to tick the right box. And I think we need to work at international and national levels, ensuring that there are better quality standards for nursing homes. If we can have standards that we can aspire to, that's probably better than standards that are dumbing people down always. So if you want to know more about the PACE study, these are a couple of publications. There are many more that are currently in progress and will be out very shortly. We have a website. There's a Twitter. I've already tweeted that I'm speaking here today. So Europe will know that this conference is happening, but that's the hashtag to look at if you're interested. And with my palliative care hat on, I would very much welcome you to come to the European Association for Palliative Care World Research Congress, which is going to be in Bern in Switzerland next year. There are going to be many sessions about caring for older people, and we're actually having a pre-conference on the 23rd session specifically about end-of-life care in nursing homes. So thank you very much for your attention.
So we do have a bit of time for questions, particularly because this was a full-on research presentation. Do you have questions for Sheila to clarify?
It's only a general question.
Let me get a microphone here for you. Here we go. Bridget's coming up. And then we'll come back. Okay. Let's start here and then come there.
Okay, it's a wonderful concept. Would love to see it implemented. But will it be taken up on a voluntary basis, or will there be any requirement for individual, such as for licensing or for assessment in the future to implement?
Okay, very good question. Because some, the gold standards framework, certainly has to be paid for and licensed, if you're thinking of that one. This one is free. It has been implemented. We've done a trial where we've implemented across 6 countries. At the moment, we are, I and my colleagues at Lancaster are currently reviewing all of the evaluation evidence. So what we're going to produce for next year is a revised PACE 6 steps intervention, which is going to be free. It's free to download. You will have all of the resources and the packs of information that you need. It will be available in 6 languages, but including English. So it's free.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you.
My question is more general, really. When I was as an MEP in Europe, I went to the Gastein conference every year, which was the Europe European conference that really, I suppose, encompassed all the areas of research and had very great subjects. But do you have a worry about the implications of Brexit on your collaboration with European countries? Because it's probably going to be quite the deterrent in terms of sharing.
Yes, it's a complete disaster, but that's my sort of opinion as an academic. Yes, I've been involved in 5 large European Commission-funded studies. I think we will all wait and see what will happen for the future, but I imagine that it's going to have quite an impact on what will be possible for people living in the UK.
Thank you, Sheila. And I should note, on a happy note, in American palliative care, we now distinguish between palliative care and hospice so that you no longer have to give up curative therapies or even disease-controlling therapies. So we're moving along a bit better, shall we say. So there we are. And next, where am I with the mouse here? Honestly, I'm technically challenged today. Yeah. Where'd my mouse go? Yeah.
There we go.
Okay, you're back. Thanks. And we're going to turn that one off. And that's brilliant. Yeah. Okay. So. Anne, yeah. I'm going to say this is Anne Hickey. She is a fabulous nurse and is going to talk to us about end-of-life care. She's got a great sense of humor, and going back to where we started with Dana, I think a great sense of humor is a really fabulous thing when we're talking about something we're all going to face.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Anne. Thank you very much for your invite, Mary, and your team here today. I really appreciate it. I apologise in advance for any repetition from Sheila's, but bear with me. Basically, one thing that unites all of us is, listen, we're going to die. And I think the other thing that unites all of us is we don't want to talk about it. But today, we're going to talk about it, and we have been talking about it, okay? So bear with me. So essentially, yes, I'm going to talk about end-of-life care in an acute hospital setting, though. So it's Tala Hospital is the name of the hospital, which is a hospital in West County Dublin. The hospice-friendly hospital movement, which started in 2007, and the impact of that in nursing homes and in acute hospitals and around the country, and I'm sure a lot of you know a lot about it, and then the achievements in Tala Hospital. So, end-of-life care, the definition from the Irish Hospice Society is a point of receiving a life-limited diagnosis through the months before death, up to and including the final hours. So, essentially a continuum, rather than a point in time. And I think, from my experience, the biggest mistakes we all make is we don't start that end-of-life care discussion soon enough. Families want to help, and they say don't talk to Johnny because Johnny wouldn't be able to cope, or Mary wouldn't be able to cope. So Johnny or Mary are just about to die, but they have no time to get their head around the process that they are dying or to make any provisions. But it's all done in the best care as such. Or the end-of-life care refers to the care of people with advanced or limited conditions for whom death within 1 or 2 years is likely, as well as those in terminal phase of illnesses. It also encompasses the care of the bodily remains after of the deceased person, which is really, really important for dignity and respect. And again, another definition is it's just a highly dynamic phase of an illness, and it's important that the goals need to be redefined as new symptoms appear, but old symptoms may reappear. So it has to be a discussion, and open and honest and frank, and they're difficult, and I'm not saying they're easy, they're very difficult, but it's usually anticipated, and that's the main thing. So essentially in acute hospitals we cannot cure everybody, but we can compassionately care for everybody, and I think that's the most important thing. There are all levels of palliative care in an acute hospital setting, and there's all spectrums of specialities and ages, but we can care for them all. Sheila referred to the trajectory of end-of-life care and the fact that sometimes we do have the family meeting and the next day Johnny and Mary are sitting up saying, I'm absolutely fine, I'm not dying at all. Usually in cancer care it's a kind of a linear trajectory and death, but in a lot of other diseases there's a lot of ups and downs. People deteriorate rapidly but then they improve, and thank God for that. I'm not here to kill everybody. So essentially the genesis for the hospice-friendly hospital movement was Atlantic Philanthropies that gave the money to the Irish Hospice Foundation. There was other fundings around, and the Health Service Executive. That was in 2007. 2008 and 2009 was the audit, and essentially it was an audit of 30 hospitals, Tala was included, of patients 3 months before they died. It included the relatives, obviously, the staff, nurses, and the doctors, and it looked at things, a range of things of, right, did the person die in a single room, and was that their choice, or were they in a six-bedded? How did they get into the hospital? Was it through ED, or if they had palliative care, if they were under the speciality of palliative care, did they go directly to that ward? What was the pain control like, and the differences between the doctors and nurses of their perception of the pain control, and obviously the relatives. And okay, if relatives wanted to stay, were they told there was a flexible visiting time? I think that came up this morning. Was there toilets for them? Was there a private room where they could have that difficult discussion or be told of their diagnosis? Could they cry? And if they were dying in a six-bedded, then stories from a lot of relatives were they were afraid to cry because in the middle of the night everybody else was asleep and they felt they had to be quiet, or they felt they had to dumb down their feelings of saying goodbye to their mother or their father or their sister or their brother, whoever it was. And if it was an ED, oh God help us, like it was just desperate, it was just the worst of the worst. So essentially then from the audit of sort of trying to say where all those 30 hospitals were came the standards. The standards were developed between the HSE, the Irish Hospice Foundation and HICWA. At the moment, I'm afraid to say they're nice to have. There's no requirement that they have to be implemented. And the 4 standards, I'll talk about a little bit about them later, but it's the hospital to say, listen, it's everyone's business. No matter what you say on your name badge, it's everyone's business. Death is everyone's business. So that goes from the porter to the cleaner, to the housekeeping lady, to the doctor, to the consultant, to the nurse, to the healthcare assistant, to absolutely everybody. I'm sure I've missed out loads, but to absolutely everyone, multidisciplinary team, everybody. To the patient themselves, what's their wishes? Have we spoken to them? Do we know anything about their wishes? If they can speak and communicate to us. To the family, what is their wishes and concerns? How, obviously they can be told about the patient's condition with the patient's consent, but obviously they have been the carers maybe for Mammy for 50 years, and why aren't we talking to them? Why aren't we bringing them on board? Something like has been said all morning, and the last person is the staff. A lot of the audit was about, okay, if it was junior staff, how much exposure did they get to death? Did they understand death? What did they expect of death? And what was the family's expectations of death? How much education did they get in their undergraduate and postgraduate studies? So that is that. So the philosophy, which was what the hospice wanted to introduce into hospitals, is that a patient is treated with dignity and respect. And they're treated as individuals, which you kind of think it would happen anyway, but their physical, emotional, social, spiritual well-being of the person was given equal emphasis. And family members and those important to the patient are included in that approach. So they also wanted to look at the 360-degree approach. It is the care of all patients and families, regardless of the age, regardless of the disease, and whether their death was sudden or expected. And it's a system-wide approach. And essentially, it's a culture change, as you've spoken about before. It's also a change management project, and they're always difficult because you're trying to change behaviours and change the way we all work in the organisation. Again, this is the Irish Hospice Foundation, and they were saying, well, why do we want to invest in palliative care and end-of-life care and bereavement, and why is it so important? And they were saying the scale, that dying in hospital is going to continue, obviously, and the cohort that die every year, from the audit it was 43%. So just think about that. That's nearly half the amount of people that die, and 75% of those deaths are expected. So we can do something about it. This is something that we all know it's going to happen, so why can't we put more things in place? Yes, I appreciate we're in acute hospital, but we still know this is going to happen. Quality. Obviously, communication has come up in absolutely every single report that's happened around end-of-life care, that it either was too brief, it was uncomfortable, it didn't happen. There were family members organising for family members to come home from abroad, but yet the person was dying or had died before they went back into the room because no one really knew that they were actually going to die. Access, again, it's about does everybody really need to come through ED? Can we not organise a better way of someone that is known to palliative care, or is someone that is dying or has come from a nursing home for whatever the reason, or whoever panicked or didn't panic, or if they have a DNR form or not? Can we not do it better that they have to go through ED? And we said today that, you know, all the movements of patients, it speeds up their death by 2 days every single time they move to ward. And how many times do they move? And does every move really need to happen? They also said in the Irish Hospice Foundation that the cost is actually 13%. Sometimes that's because the conversation hasn't happened, so we can't process the fact that mommy or daddy or my husband or my brother is dying, so therefore I want everything. That I haven't actually processed the fact that the disease is life-limiting, and no matter how much treatment or no matter how much MRIs or CTs or anything else, it's not going to change it. And because in all of us we want to make things better and we don't want to hurt people, we haven't had the honest conversation, so we do all the treatment, which is futile, and where does that leave the person in the bed in the middle of all that? So obviously it's about relevant research, it's about the talk of the hospital group CEOs and the directors of nursing, it's about the honest conversation, it's about the national and local plans and to support the hospital plans, and it's how to add that quality of care. And essentially it just comes back to Dame Cecily Saunders, sorry, can you see? It's about the fact that you matter because you are you. You matter to the end of your life. We will do all we can, not only to help you die peacefully, but actually to live until you die. And that's the most important thing. You need to live until you die. So just to put all that in context, this is the Central Statistics Office's figures from 2014. I couldn't get a newer date on it. And it essentially says that cancer and circulatory disease constitute 31% of all deaths. Now that's changed. It used to be all that was cancer was higher, but both of them are the same at the moment, okay? Respiratory is 11%, accidents and suicides and external causes are 6%, and then the other. And the other, they would say, is dementia or frail older people, but you know, that kind of spectrum of age. And it is estimated in 2014 that the amount of people living with dementia was 41,000, and they say in the next 30 years it's going to be 141,000. So that's just to try and put some figures on it. Then where do people die? And if you ask anyone, all of us want to die at home. But if you go under that research a little bit, the patient that's dying doesn't want to be a burden. The family don't really know how they're going to cope. So everyone would say, yes, I'd love to die at home, but I really want some medical intervention that I know is around the corner I can call on, because otherwise it gets all a bit scary. So if I was going to die at home, absolutely happy days, but give me the information and the support and to make that happen. This is the Irish Hospice Foundation from 17, so it's 38% die in acute hospitals. I appreciate that's gone down from 43 on that one. But if you add up the 12 and the 38, that gives you 60% that die in hospitals, and add in the 11 of the hospice. So the majority of people die in a hospital setting of one type or another. So the 26% they state is 210 people that died at home, and that has remained constant, as I said, with support at home and generally from the hospice. So this is just to put the context in with the Tala Hospital figures, and we had 493 deaths in 2016, and the HYPE data states, it's just from the ED, that brought in dead is BID, and DID is died in the department, and then they're added to the total from the hospital, and that gives you the grand total. They're saying that over 12,000 people died in hospitals, and that equates to the 43%. So these are the standards that I spoke about before, and that's what's they're about, and the majority of the role of the end-of-life care coordinator, the end-of-life care committee, and the chair of the committee is trying to put them in action in the hospitals. There's a lot of resistance, but there's a lot of energy, and there's a lot of fantastic ideas and creative ideas of how that's going to happen. The little multicoloured little thing there is the voices, and the voices, it symbolised the voices, and the voices was research undertaken by the Mater Hospital and James's Hospital. It's published just a few months ago. It was from 2015 to 2016. It was around 400 deaths, and it was research on the relatives, and essentially it looked at what was the journey like for them, what was the experience like for them of their relative dying in those two acute busy hospitals. The purple symbol is the end-of-life symbol, and it's what we use to denote that somebody is dying or has died, so that everyone is respectful and that everyone is aware that they need to lower their voices and give respect to the family who are going through a very difficult time. It's also on anything to do with end-of-life care, so on the mortuary trolley, the cover for the mortuary trolley, the end-of-life care altar, any symbols at all. And the room is just saying that the environment is so important. So how do we get those family rooms? It usually involves robbing offices on doctors, which doesn't go down very well, but it's trying to say, listen, what's important here? What are we doing here? And we need a space. We need space for families so that they can get their heads around things. Yes, it still happens in my hospital that people are told bad news in corridors. People are told an awful lot of things in corridors because we don't have space. So it's trying to get the energy around moving people out of offices and to get space back again. Because in older days, it was counted that no one went into the patient's room. So what do we need a patient's room for? Sure, nobody uses it. And you kind of go, well, hold on a minute. This is really, really important. So it's trying to change back the clock, if you will. So from the Voices research that I've spoken about, they would say that these are the 5 core elements from the HFH programme, and therefore the 5 core elements that end-of-life care coordinator spends their time working on. You can see them yourself, and I'm going to now just go around through them. Is that all right? So the first one is communication, and as I said, compassionate communication is difficult, but it needs to happen, and it's embedded in the hospice-friendly hospital approach with all hospitals. It obviously needs to be consistent information. That's what the families would say, that sometimes a doctor will say one thing in the morning, in the evening it's different. So it needs to be consistent so they know where it's going. The Omnibus report was out in 2014. Again, it collated the amount of complaints that was received by their office in relation to, or his office, in relation to end-of-life care. And obviously communication was number one. Obviously postmortems and the issues family have around postmortems, the issue of visiting, and the issue of, I'm lost now, I can't remember another issue, but essentially all the quality of care initiatives. Shared decision making between consultants and palliative care. A lot of the nurses on the ward would say that the consultants don't refer to palliative care soon enough. They don't want to have the conversations, and the family are left in the middle. There is no palliative care on call in Tala Hospital and a lot of the acute hospitals at the weekend. So if you're going to die on a Friday evening, it's very, very difficult because there's no referral. If there's a referral to they're on call from the hospice, but they don't want a referral from a nurse, they want it from a doctor. Generally, the on-call team don't know the patient, so it's a disaster. So we're working to change that, and there's loads of good initiatives in place, but it hasn't changed yet, so it's work in progress. Listen. A lot of us, I suppose, because we're nurses, we like to do things, we like to sort things out, and sometimes we forget that half the conversation happens when we listen to people. We don't necessarily have to say anything. Touch is really, really important. And I always say to my students that when you go into a room, just sit, just be. And that says an awful lot. And obviously ask the person if you can touch them, but just to sit and be and give them back the power of what they want for that day. Maybe they don't want to get dressed, maybe they don't want to wash, but that's okay too. But actually ask them, instead of that we have this rota and it has to happen and we have to tick the box and it has to be done and da-da-da-da-da. They're the most important person that you're going to be caring for that day. So go in, talk to them, chat to them and see where they're at and what is it they want. Because 7% of communication is words, 55% is your physical presence, and that is so much more important than actually the words. And sometimes the words, as someone was saying to me at lunch, just make it so much more worse. So sometimes you just have to zip it, say nothing and just be, and let them take over what they want to say or do. The All Ireland Institute of Let's Talk and the feedback from that and of how to talk. I spoke about patient empowerment. The HFH network is a support system essentially for all the hospitals that are in the network. And the network at this stage is over 40 hospitals between the publics and privates. It also includes the maternity hospitals and the paediatric hospitals. And the coordinators. So there's 4 for the hospital network groups. So they communicate about what's the difficulties, what's the developments, how can we improve this. So there's a synergy from all of that and sharing of ideas. And the coordinator group, at the moment there's 7 coordinators. I'm number 7. I've just been appointed 3 weeks ago, but I have had an interest in this, so that's, I suppose, why I'm speaking. I used to be the site manager and the end-of-life coordinator, so now I'm just the coordinator. The oversight group is a new development, which is absolutely fantastic. It's actually the HSE coming on board really, really much more with the Irish Hospice Foundation and putting their energies behind it and their nouns behind it and saying, right, this is a fantastic programme, let's see where we can go with this and how we can develop it more. Again, communication, and this is the development that I and my team developed, and it's about escalating care. And the first bit is to talk to the patient. Now, obviously, that's impossible if the patient has got cognitive impairment or has got a tube down their throat to help them to breathe in ICU. I used to have it down at the bottom, but everyone just kind of forgot to talk to the patient. So I put it up at the top to sort of say, listen, the patient's the most important person. So if the patient can't talk to you, talk to the family, please. I'm not sure if you can actually see that. And then is the person for resuscitation, are they not? ERTs is an emergency response team which tries to prevent people actually crashing. So you see the deteriorating person, if they score 9 or whatever, you call the team, or are they not for it? And then the beautiful last way was, everyone used to write, was they were for medical management, and everyone was going, well, what's medical management and what does that mean? So, there was, what I'm trying to say is there was 100 ways of trying to say that a person was DNR or what that meant, that particular consultant. So we've defined, with the aid of all the consultants, what medical management means and how much the care is or is not or whatever, and then it has to be signed. It's generally filled out by a registrar and it's then signed by a consultant. And we developed an information leaflet to sort of say, it's meant to be a process, so it's not meant to be just one point in time. So the information leaflet was for the family or the patient themselves to think about it, talk about it, and have a conversation, and then come back on it later. So this is just one point in time. So obviously if the patient goes home, is readmitted, the conversation has to happen again. So it's not a continuum. If the patient gets better and this is not appropriate, it changes. So is that all right? So it's not just because I filled it out today, this is it, and you're never changing. So it does change. If you get better or things change, it changes. Is that all right? So meeting the care needs, I've just spoken about the discussion, about the fact it's a process and it reflects the goals and the values and the preference of the future treatment in the context of anticipation deterioration of the patient condition, that they won't be able to speak, and the capacity that they won't be able to communicate to others. That's what it's called, the resuscitation and treatment escalation plan. The Think Ahead document, I'm afraid I only have one. But the whole idea about the Think Ahead, again, is from the Irish Hospice Foundation. It's your death, so you need to think ahead. As I was saying, we're all in this together. We're all going to die. We all need to think about it. As a culture, we don't like thinking or talking about it, but we need to make our wishes known. And if you do go to the trouble, it only takes 30 minutes, and if you're over 50, we should be doing it, so it kind of includes kind of nearly all of us. But if you do think about it and talk about it and write it down, please tell someone, whether it's your GP, whether it's your partner, whether it's your wife, your husband, your mother, your brother, your sister, and keep it, that everybody knows what it is. So God forbid, if you are involved in an RTA, you can't speak, everybody knows that this is your wishes and I can get your wishes because I know what your wishes are. Does that make sense? So you can send that around if you want. And for the nursing homes, it is what matters to me. And it's, well, the Think Ahead is on the Irish website, the Irish Hospice website, and you can download it if you want. It's £2 if you want to buy the hard copy. And there's a high level of integration between the hospital and community to make this work and to allow people to go home, and obviously with the care and support they need for the rapid discharge. Support for relatives. Discussion of patients and their family concerns, and that's so important, but the patient has to give consent for the family to be involved in that discussion, as we know. Patients' values and personal goals for care. Their understanding about their illness and their prognosis. Their preference of care and treatment, and to give back control, as I said, to empower the patient in their choice, if that is their wish. If they don't want to discuss it or to speak about it, we have to respect that as well. Bereavement support. A lot of carers have bereavements in their lives as well, and sometimes it is the silent grief of a miscarriage, or it could be suicide, and we as their team workers don't know how to sometimes talk about it or refer to it, and we just ignore it. So there's a lot of work in the Irish Hospice Foundation done on bereavement care. There's a lot of leaflets on bereavement care, and every single hospital is writing a bereavement policy for their staff as to how to support them. Equally, I would always say to everyone on the different wards, when somebody dies, it's important to press the pause button for every staff member on the ward to acknowledge that something fundamental and has happened, and to check into how everybody is about that. Now, it may not be on your side that the death has happened, but you're all a team, and it behoves all of us to look after each other and support each other. So whether that means reading a reflective poem, having a cup of tea, having a hug, whatever it is that works for that group that day, but I think the pause button has to be pressed. A lot of guys in theatre said to me, but Anne, there's an emergency on the table, you know, we have to go. The emergency or whatever is going to be still an emergency, but this is only 2 minutes. It can be, you know, 5 seconds. But I think it's important to pause, to look after ourselves, but to acknowledge it as well. You know, equally when there's a retrieval, that's very difficult for the staff in theatre, and they say they're just left very empty after it, and they have nowhere to go with that. And it's about empowering us all that we don't need a guru from outside. Yes, we do a lot of times need a guru from outside, but it's about empowering ourselves to just check in with each other. So we're not leaving someone to go, you know, on a 50-mile round trip feeling that they're at fault, or feeling, you know, having emotions that they haven't spoken about, or feelings they haven't spoken about. So it's just about pausing to check in each other. And obviously there's employee supports if the people can be referred to as well. The importance about giving written and verbal communication and reinforcing both of those. The remembrance services, a load of families members would always say that they felt that was the first time that they could walk really in that journey of bereavement, because they were remembered, and everyone remembered them and came up to them at the service, and to link in with the ward champions. And they are just the people that have a great interest in end-of-life care and support it and moving it along, and work with everyone to try and help everyone to get a good end-of-life care. The audit of research, I've put an iceberg because we're only starting really, but it's to put where people die on the monthly quality stats, to say, is it a single room, and was that their preference? But actually, how long was the person in the single room before they died? Was it a nanosecond, or was it actually a day or two or a week? If they died in a 6-bedded, yes, it's not ideal. Maybe that was their preference, because I often find if people get placed in single rooms, no one talks to them anymore, because they're going to die, so no one includes them in any conversation. They're meant to be fine, they're meant to be in the room, and we've done our bit. So it's difficult, and I'm sure it must be a very lonely place to be in that departure lounge where you don't want to be, but no one's talking to you about it, and there's all these collusions going on, but there's no one talking to you honestly. Develop and continuously measure the relevant quality indicators for end-of-life care and for whatever those are topical in your place of work. We took an active part in the Voices of the Patient survey. We audited that's my intention, to audit bereaved relatives in Tallaght Hospital. The initial audit that I spoke about of 8 and 9, the Irish Hospice, we only had 6% reply from the relatives. Now 6% of them said we were great, but 6% is low. So I was hoping that we could re-audit again to see what the baseline is to improve that. A collaborative approach, obviously, between all the specialities, between all the nurses, all the speciality nurses, between absolutely everyone in the hospital, that it is made known that it is everyone's business and that we can improve end-of-life care, and to include in that the palliative care framework. The education, the major education is Final Journeys, which again is about empowering staff with the knowledge and the competence to give good end-of-life care, and it walks them through what happens before and after death, and what happens in the hospital, and how to talk to people, to families, and how to mind themselves and self-care. Dealing with bad news is, as it says on the tin, dealing with bad news. Again, it's predominantly aimed at medical colleagues, but you can never get a medical colleague sitting on a chair in front of you. It's very difficult to get nurses as well, due to, as everyone has said, the staffing embargoes at the moment. Essentially, it's been pushed at the moment by the Irish Cancer Society in again to try and do it well, but to support the people who are doing it, given the bad news. Care of the deceased, FETAC level 5, staff inductions, undergraduates and postgraduates nursing programmes, palliative care needs assessment, sharing learning identified, and innovations from all the different hospitals, so we're not all reinventing the wheel, that we share what is learned. Workshop for non-clinical staff, because obviously Final Journeys is 8-hour day and they're saying, here. So it's trying and keep their interest, but actually just specifically hone it in for them. Medical and surgical programs, the care of the dying, okay. Staff support and self-care, bereavement support for staff, dementia palliative care, and advanced care planning. Respect and dignity. The Director of Nursing is the executive leave. A lot of family wants flexible visiting time, and as I said before, to be told of that. If possible, you know, a car park space. If possible, a space where they can sit in private, but there's a toilet, and there isn't a major drama when they want to sit and be and cry and be emotional. Support from the implementation of the National Consent Policy, environmental support, rapid discharge. I think I've gone through most of those. These are the resources that I've said that are in Tallaght Hospital. The Pastoral Care Locker, which is the brown locker there, the end-of-life symbol, the drapes for the mortuary, the handover bag, sending a sympathy card from Pastoral Care, usually within 6 weeks of the person dying, the camp beds and the family rooms. The first family room I did up in Tallaght was in William Stokes, which is care of the acute stroke person, so they obviously needed it. At the moment, I'm trying to develop a project with handprints for ICU, so that the patient that's dying has a handprint, so the family have a memory of it. And we're doing up the viewing room in ED. And these are the recommendations from the Irish Hospice Foundation of Design and Dignity as to what's required in doing up a room and what's the essential that's there. Bono put it brilliantly when he said, "How we care for the sick and dying is surely a test of our humanity. Just as we fight for equality in life, we should fight for equality in death." That's the website. It's wonderful. There's a lot of information on it. There's a lot of leaflets on it. Please peruse it. It is absolutely fantastic. Thank you very much for listening. They were my references. Thank you.
You've done beautiful job. And one of the things we can do now is save your questions, because I think you can see the continuity from Sheila's to Anne's presentation. And I'm struck by the language of friendliness and how we create friendly environments, transiting settings. So do keep in mind, why is it that we have to reach out to long-term care facilities, to reach into acute care facilities, to create a sense of friendliness? We'll be thinking about these things, I hope, then in the context of having Chrissy McGinn and Richard Hewitt come on up. They are going to lead us through what I think will be really important work on leadership. And they are truly a dynamic duo. That's probably a very American sort of phrase to use, but they are a dynamic duo who are able, I think, as soon as I get to the right slides, which I can do now, to help us put this in context. How will we lead? What is it that we will do? So thank you both.
How do you make this small? And how do you change it? Is it this?
Yeah, so it's upper left, this one.
Is this on?
Forward and back.
Okay.
Is this on? Yes.
Yeah,
it is. Okay.
you're on. There you
Sorry.
are. Wonderful.
Okay.
Take
Thank
it away.
you.
And this
Thanks
one's
very
working
much.
too. First of all, I'd just like you to know that I have ironed my shirt. I knew you'd be just itching to know that. But it is ironed, I promise. You can't see the back. Sorry.
Thank you for asking us to come here this afternoon, Mary, to wind up the day. And what we want to talk about, it says up there, conscious leadership. And I was a bit concerned that the title might mean that the room would have emptied, because people often say, well, I'm not a leader. Well, we are starting from the belief that every person in this room is a leader. And the reason that we're saying that is if you think about all of the things that have been said today, we all have a sphere of influence. We all have an effect on other people around us, whether that's on a colleague, whether it's on a patient or a resident, whether it's on someone in our family, whether it's our friends. Every single one of us has an effect on the person. The person sat next to us, we have an effect on. And in that sense, we are all leaders. And that's our approach this afternoon, that we are in fact all leaders, and that therefore when we're thinking about caring for our frail elders, we all actually have a part to play in that, because we as leaders all create that environment of care. So this afternoon, what we want to spend some time thinking about is how can we remain conscious as leaders, and how can we create that appreciative environment of care.
One of the definitions of leadership is that the leader creates the environment in which other people can achieve the organisation's objectives. Yeah? The objectives here is care. The objective is looking after people. So what we're saying is that we all have responsibility to help create and sustain that environment in which care can take place. And we're talking about conscious care. But before we do that, what we'd like to do is, is it still there? Yeah. You've had an immensely busy day. We've had loads and loads of information, and we thought it'd be really good if we just took a couple of minutes, quiet, just to reflect on the day, maybe go into your heads and think, so what have I really appreciated about today? There's been absolutely loads, you know, from the person you sat with at lunch through to all the talks you've had, and maybe it was just going out for a walk at lunchtime, I don't know. But if you'd like to just spend a couple of minutes, and we'll time 2 minutes, and just have some silence and just think, so what have I appreciated about today? And why do I appreciate those things? So what have you appreciated and why? And just have a think.
Okay. We thought that was important to just have a little silence. In our society today, we very rarely have chance for a little silence, and it's really useful to try and cultivate those minutes or two just when we can just take care of ourselves in that way. So we've used that silence to think about the day, to think about what we've appreciated and why we've appreciated it. And so now we'd like to flip the coin and take some time to just talk about that rather than be in silence. So if you'd just like to turn to the person sat next to you and just have a conversation about what each of you have appreciated about the day, lots of different things, and why you've appreciated those. So we'll take that 5 minutes to do that, and we'll call 2 minutes.
Okay, have you had enough time? Okay. Have you enough time? Have you had enough time? So that's raised the energy in the room, yes? Can you hear the volume gradually going up as we were talking away? Well, that's the beginning of an appreciative environment, isn't it? You started to feel okay. The energy's risen. People are smiling. It's expansive, if you like. People are feeling good. It leads towards an air of kindness. Within that sort of feeling okay and feeling good about ourselves, and listening to the other person, of course, there's an air of kindness, there's an air of expansion, there's an air of feeling good.
This is what we're trying to create in the workplace. This is the setting that we want. We want people to feel good. We want people to feel expansive. We want people to be kind, and that seems to come when we are feeling good, when we are feeling expansive. If you think about it, we're not afraid. We're actually feeling open, and we most of all want to celebrate. And really, that's what you've been doing as you were just having that conversation. You were celebrating being here today and what's happened today. And just a minute or two just raises the energy so that we do begin to create this appreciative environment. And that's what you've just done here, just in a few minutes.
So we're talking about creating that sort of environment at work so that we can have this sort of feeling at work, so that we can do these things at work. So what's been happening to you here? Well, if I can get this. You were listening to each other, and I'm guessing you were interested in what the other one had to say because it's a shared experience, it's something you could talk about. So you wanted to be understood as well. So you wanted to understand the other person and you wanted to understand. Do you remember the talk this morning about the connecting with people? Yeah? It's exactly what you were doing there. There was a lot of listening going on and hearing and understand. I'm guessing there was no judgment, because you just wanted to find out, or you wanted to talk, you know. You weren't in there judging about, oh, I don't think much of her. Oh, dear God. Have you seen her shoes? No, didn't happen. So that's part of this setting, this environment as well. It's a lack of judgment. It's a lack of just accepting each other and accepting and wanting to hear, and a mutual respect. As we say, there was no judgment, or if there was, I didn't see any. Do you see how it works? Do you see how we can consciously, but we're talking about consciously creating this environment?
What's interesting there, we've talked about this as conditions for kindness, and you can see that when we're in that space as we just were now, we naturally create those conditions for kindness. It will automatically follow that we become kind when we do this. But there are other conditions of kindness that we can add to this. One of the most important is to be really present. And this has been mentioned a number of times today in different guises. When we're really present, we give full attention. We saw when Patrick was talking, the whole idea of really seeing someone, of really, really seeing someone and feeling that you have been seen and heard. And that attention, that full attention, actually doesn't take any more time. We haven't got to make lots of time to give someone full attention. We've simply got to be really present with that person. And when we are, that changes the experience. That changes the experience that we have together. It changes the experience for both of us if one of us tunes in and is really present, because somehow it encourages the other person to do the same too.
I know that sometimes that can be hard because you've suddenly stopped and goodness, you've just been there and you're still thinking about that. Or, oh my God, I've got to stop and talk to this person. I was just on my way to go and see Da-di-da and I was just working that out. Oh my God, and they want to talk to me? But yes, we were talking about, Anne was talking about supporting each other in this and supporting people. Yes, 2 minutes to stop and give someone a hug or to be really present with them, whatever they want. That's what it's all about. We're about creating this environment of kindness.
When we're really present, the other thing that we seem to do is we tend to build on people's ideas. Rather than yes butting, we really hear, and we're more likely to say, oh yes, and we build on ideas rather than criticising. It moves us away from the criticism. I guess because we've moved into that place of suspending judgment that we just talked about a minute ago. And in that place, as I say, we're much more likely to build on ideas. Also, when we're really present, and again, this has been mentioned so many times today, we really value ourselves and other people. When I'm really present, I'm self-aware. When I'm really present, I can ask myself, what am I bringing to this conversation? What am I bringing to this? And when I do that, I appreciate myself and I value myself. And when I do that, I appreciate and value the other person. And you see, again, something else that we've talked about so often today, it's about being human. It's not about the roles. It's about taking off the hat that says I'm a this or I'm a that. It's actually seeing the person. It's being totally, totally human. And in that place, I allow someone else to see me too. And that's when we begin to connect.
So there's a sense of vulnerability there to some extent, because we're connecting at a level that's beyond the protective shell of our roles. You know, we heard earlier, it was said about we're human beings, not human doings, or whatever the one would be for roles. But we're not, we're actually human beings. And so it is about this being beyond the role, a connection person to person.
As Richard said, sometimes that can make us feel a little vulnerable. You know, where it's easier maybe with the uniform on than thinking about what's it like if I'm just this person. But that sometimes takes courage. Sometimes we have to be brave, but it makes a huge difference to the other person. And what it leads to is trust. If I think that you are seeing me as a human being, I can trust you. If I think that you're just seeing me in a role, I may be asking, why does she want to know that? Why have I got to tell her about so-and-so? But if I see her as another human being, then I can trust. And then I believe that things will be confidential. I can actually say things. There will be some confidentiality between us. And that's when we really start to build relationships. And that's what this is all about. How are we building those relationships?
Okay, so we're talking about consciously creating this appreciative environment. We all know that, you know, when we feel great, it's very easy to do. You know, we do it automatically. Yes, of course we want to be nice to people and we want to feel great, feel expensive and all the rest of it. But what about, as someone said earlier, if I'm feeling grumpy today? If I came in and it wasn't so good? Well, the self-consciousness is about, I'm feeling grumpy today. I realise I'm feeling grumpy today. What am I going to do about it? Can I do some work with myself for 5 minutes and create this environment of appreciation? In which case, yes, go ahead and do it. And we saw how easily it is done just earlier. You know, you spent 5 minutes talking to each other about what you'd appreciated about today. Well, that didn't take long, did it? And that was okay. So that was a way, if you like, of, okay, putting me in a better place. Some sort of gratitude and celebration of where things are.
By consciously creating this environment, it encourages us to be kind to people. If we are kind to our colleagues are kind to other people. There's a ripple effect. We are setting the tone. Kindness is hugely infectious. So if we set that tone, that kindness can ripple out. You all know if someone's given you a smile, someone said something nice to you, you go away and the next person that you see, they get a smile too. It just carries on, and that's what we're trying to encourage.
So what we've been talking about has been connection. Oh, went twice, sorry. Connection, yes, at the top of that pyramid there. So that's connection between you and me, connection between us and colleagues, us and bosses, us and subordinates, us and patients, But it's also a connection with other things. It's a connection with ourselves. It's knowing what's going on for me. It's liking, valuing myself and being connected to myself, knowing what's happening to me. Okay, but there's also connection with there's something greater than me, whatever you want to call it. God, the universe, there's something greater, the way, I don't know. But most of us have a feeling that there is something more than us around, and connection with that is also so important, that I can connect with the greater good, the greater than me, and then through that connect with other people. So it comes down through me and I connect with you. It goes back. You connects with you, you come back to me. So we're talking about, if you almost, there's three of us in this, you know, there's you, me, and there's the greater good, or whatever you want to call God.
When we're thinking about support, and again, it's been mentioned a lot today, the fact that when we are in a caring environment, we need to be able to have support. And one of the greatest supports we can have is this connection. The connection with nature, the connection with the divine, the connection with the universe. But it's allowing ourselves to be conscious of having that connection, and that we can use that connection to feed ourselves, but also to feed other people. And it's interesting, when we think about leaders, we often talk about them being good with people. They're very good at connecting with other people, which is great. But they also need to be very good at connecting with themselves, so that they are truly aware of where they are at the moment. But also this connection with I would call it the divine, you will call it God, or whatever is your particular way of seeing that energy that is bigger than yourself, that brings something more to what you do every day. But if you like, is part of this meaning and purpose that's been talked about. And we can do that consciously. But the other part of this is that we can consciously reflect. Now, we all have, in care these days, reflective practice. But it's more than that. It's actually, how do I reflect throughout the day? How do I just stop and think every now and then, what difference am I making at this moment? Just at this moment, what's the difference that I'm making with this other person or in this situation? And it's quite interesting if we can just stop and reflect. As I say, it's a quick question. I haven't got to take 5 minutes out. I can literally be walking down the corridor and think, what difference did I make with that last meeting that I had with so-and-so? What difference did I make as I brushed somebody's hair just now? Very simple, quick reflection. It just helps us to come back to, what am I about? What am I here for?
And did you hear that's a reflection on the connection, if you like?
And lastly, the conscious leader, which is what we all are, thinks about service. How am I serving someone? Now, again, in care, we think about that automatically, because that's what we're here to do. We're here to serve other people. But we tend to think about that in practical ways. What have I just done in terms of helping this person to dress? Or even, what have I just done by writing this report? But there's so much more to this idea of service, and we've touched on it a lot today, because I serve someone when I really connect with them as a human being. Because when I do that, people know that they have been seen. They know that there is this deep connection between us. And when I do that, it actually transforms the way somebody else can be, how they see themselves in this moment, how they can be in this moment. And I haven't had to spend lots of time. This is very much part of how am I present with this person. And that's the greatest service I can give to anyone, is to be present, to encourage someone to see themselves as the best that they can possibly be. And if I see them in that way, that will encourage them to see themselves that way too. And again, it's a ripple effect. And that's what we wanted to
Do you see how they all overlap? That, you know, I mean, what Chris has been talking about there has been reflection again, but reflecting on service that time. So we reflect on the connection, we reflect on service. And the service overlaps because when I connect with you, I'm actually serving you. And similarly, when I'm reflecting, I'm actually serving as well. Do you see how they do? They all overlap and feed into each other.
So you might like to just take a minute or two, again, to talk with the person sat next to you, and just think about, how do you do some of these things? How do you connect with whatever you see as greater than yourself? How do you reflect each day at different times? How do you serve others? Because I suspect you do all of these much more than you realise. So it's just about stopping and just sharing to remind yourselves, how do I do all of these things? Just a minute or two.
Good. Is that enough, do you think? What time is it? How long? Yeah. Do they need much more? We've got to set an intent next, haven't they? And then we'll just wrap it up. So it's only about 3 minutes then, so there's time.
Okay, enough time. Enough time.
It's good to talk, isn't it?
That's really encouraging to see you all talking away, because I suspect it means that you actually do all of these, as I say, much more than you perhaps think about. But it's good sometimes to remember this is what I'm about. And if you remember that triangle, I think it's a really good way to remember this is what I'm about. And as Richard said, if you remember that triangle and think about this is me making a connection here that I bring down here and I take over here and it comes back and we have this wonderful triangle. And I would see that as if you go back to that triangle we had on there, as a triangle of love. And although we haven't really mentioned that word today, that's actually what we're talking about the whole time.
Good grief. Right, finally, you like that word, don't you? Finally. Something that a conscious leader does is to set an intent, by which I mean, how good am I going to be today? So it's setting the intent to be the best that I can be for a period, say for today. So when you're going to work in the morning, I'm going to be the best I can be. Now, I'm not suggesting that you can actually fly or
walk
do any...
on water.
Well, I wasn't
Well,
going to...
perhaps you can.
You know, some people do it, I understand. But anyway, what you can do, though, is pick one quality, something that you know you've got, and something that you would like to express today and that will be helpful, and say, do you know what, today my intention is to be compassionate or courageous or patient or, I don't know, whatever it is that you choose for the day. And use that as a touchstone through the day. So when you're reflecting back, oh, have I just done it? Was I compassionate there? As compassionate as I could be? What would happen if I'd been more compassionate? Oh, maybe not go there. But you get the picture. So you've got this intent that you set at the beginning of the day, which will set you up to do it, to be that. And then you can reflect back through the day, how am I doing? How am I doing? What about this next meeting I'm going to? I'm going to need a bit of courage there. Okay, I can do that. And off we go.
It's really interesting if you're part of a team to encourage other people in the team to set an intent as well. You don't all have to have the same quality for that day, but if you all choose, as Richard said, on your way into work, what's my quality that I really want to express today? Perhaps I want to be generous. Perhaps I want to be calm. Perhaps I want to be more tolerant, whatever. Those qualities are all part of us all of the time. But this is consciously choosing to express one of those qualities to help us be the best that we can be. And if you're in a team, say you're in a team with 6 or 12 other people, and all of those people are setting an intent to express a quality throughout the day and to use that as a touchstone to keep coming back to, how am I doing today? Am I expressing that quality? How could I express it more? In that team, you've got 6 or 12 or however many people consciously wanting to be the best that they can be in different circumstances throughout the day. It's very, very powerful to change the way a team is working. You don't have to be the manager of the team to encourage other people around you to do that. You can just talk about the fact that that's what you do and encourage others to do the same. It makes a huge, huge difference. People feel it again. It's this ripple going out.
Okay, so there we have. This is what we've been doing today. This is what we've tried to do with you. We've called it conscious leadership because it's been about consciousness. It's about, if you remembered, it's been about being conscious about what's going on for me, but also trying to consciously create an environment in which kindness, compassion, fun, all these expansive emotions can be expressed. So setting an appreciative environment, and we saw how we did that to start with. And that led us into conditions for kindness, because when we feel like that, when we're feeling good, it's much easier to be kind. We talked about connection, reflection, and service. Connection with self, connection with divine, connection with other people. We talked about reflecting, and all of this is in fact about reflecting, because quite a lot of being conscious is actually reflecting, oh, what's happening now? Oh, how am I feeling now? Oh, I'm in a bad mood. Oh, I'm in a good mood. Oh, I shouldn't be feeling that. Whatever, it's a reflection of what's happening now. It's about raising your personal consciousness. And lastly, we looked at having a daily intent. And part of that is consciously trying to be the best that I can be and choosing to be good today, to be good at what I want to do.
So as we close now, you might like to just think, what's my intent for tomorrow? What's my intent for tomorrow? What would you like to demonstrate or express really well tomorrow so that you can be the best that you can be? And if you just think about it now, and then tomorrow, on your way to work, just remember, this is what I want to be like today. Thank you.
Stay here. Okay. Oh, I'm a bit shorter than Richard, I realize. Hello, everyone. We're going to get, I'm going to make myself taller and ask all of the speakers to come up for our plenary session. With that, then, we'll have time. I am, as we're getting the speakers to come up, I am going to, for those of you who drove, remind you, I'm actually going to save you €3.30. If you drove in and are using the car park, please go to reception on your way out. You can purchase a car park token for just €1.20. Otherwise, you're going to be paying $4.50. So that's my little bit of business. And look, they're all here while I'm making good use of time. So please, Mary and Bridget both have microphones. With that, we'll ask our afternoon's speakers to talk with us about your questions, your reflections, perhaps your intent. I love that takeaway message of what's your intent? As you appreciate, how can you intend for the next moment? So who'd like to challenge, question? And Michael, did you want to come up and join us perhaps because of your beautiful reflection? I'm sure people have questions for you. There we go. Bridget's got it. Thank you, ladies. That's great teamwork there. That's lovely. Okay. So, Mary?
Start by saying thank you to Michael. It was a difficult one for you today, but we really appreciated you honouring Sean in that way. I know he loved being a dub, and so do you. 3 in a row.
There you go.
There you go. I suppose my question is for Chrissy and Richard, if I might.
Of course.
And I know that in communications, Chrissy and Richard would always sign off by saying, "Go gently." And I think it's beautiful way to start and end our day in having some gentleness for ourselves and some gentleness for others. My question is around difficult working environments and how you actually establish a moment, a pause within that environment to reflect in the way you have just said.
Yes. This may sound a little odd, but in a very practical way, we have a friend who works in care, and she's extraordinarily busy. But what she does is she goes to the loo. And there she is only going to be there for literally a minute or two, but she goes and she sits quietly and she just breathes. And we were working on Friday afternoon with a group with Anne in, and we were talking about the breath. And to just literally take a breath. Nobody knows that you're pausing, but as you take that breath, it reminds you of who you are. Consciously take the breath. And it just brings you back to, and you can imagine it, bringing you back to your core, bringing you back to your center. Someone in the group on Friday said, it makes me feel grounded. And that's what we're talking about. It's just finding techniques that suit you individually and your circumstances, just lots of little things that you can do at different times depending on the circumstances. But the one that you can always do is breathe.
So there was some... We talked a little bit about connection, yes, connection with the divine and stuff. So depending how long you've got, but if you do need to reconnect, we found that a good way is to go outside. Literally go out. I mean, if you've got some grass somewhere, that's really nice to connect with nature. But I find that just going outside and seeing the sky is quite good. It can help just bring me back down to, okay, this is what I'm all about. Another thing I try and do, and this is when, well, I won't tell you the background story, but anyway, is when I just had a hard time, is to go back somewhere, as Chris said, you can sit on the loo or whatever, but just become totally conscious of myself again, and to sit and think, okay, so what's happening with my shoulders now? Oh, they're up around my ears. I'll just let them drop. What's happening with my feet? Oh, I've curled my toes up. I'll just relax them. Do you see what I'm saying? So just go through my body and relax it. Okay, so what am I thinking? Ah, right, okay, I'll let that one go. And how am I feeling? Anxious? Okay, I'm feeling anxious. That's interesting. I suppose other people would if they were in my position. Okay, that's nice. Do you see how long did that take? A few seconds, but it's a way of getting back into being conscious in the moment and coming back to being myself, if you like. Yes? Is that okay? As Chris said, there's loads of ideas you can pick up that can help you manage in the situation which is stressed and all the rest of it. And it's find something that suits you. You know, go and read a book for 5 minutes, whatever.
That's lovely. Thank you, Chrissy and Richard. I think we have a question in the back.
I'm part of a group of people who do a meditation every month on a certain time at a certain day, last Wednesday of the month, or first Wednesday of the month, sorry. And born of Reiki practice, we're all Reiki practitioners. And we draw an angel, you know, who supports us all every month. And we each draw one for ourselves. And we have devised the idea of saying every morning, say, for instance, my angel is of kindness. So in the morning, I say some other prayers, but this is all I have to say. I ask the angel of kindness to be with me as I think, say, and do today. So that, you know, it's just reiterating what you say. Except I think it takes me 3 breaths to get down to that place rather than 1. I really enjoyed your talk. It absolutely was riveting. And probably I'll reflect all the way home and longer.
Next questions, comments. I have one, if that's okay, Mary. I'm wondering from the panel, what are the best strategies you've found to bridge the gaps between research and best practices, policy and practice? What are your top strategies and tips for those of us trying to integrate evidence and best practice, being mindful of policy into daily practice, daily care in whatever setting we find ourselves? Do you have anything to share there that you've found to be pretty successful? Any sort of, yeah, that, Chrissy? Yeah, I didn't mean to stump this wise group. Michael?
As a non-clinician, so I don't
yes,
have that task.
Yes, please, that's great.
I've come to the belief that you cannot motivate people to be good or kind. It has to come from within themselves. And it's inherent in them. It's beaten down in a lot of them, particularly. And it's the job of a manager or a leader to facilitate them in giving life to it and encouraging them to regard themselves as valuable human beings. Because as I said earlier, if you regard yourself as a valuable human being, you can only then consider the people you're caring for as valuable human beings. It's like night following day. But that's difficult. It's difficult to do that and to create an environment, and that's what I was really taken with Chrissy and Richard's intent. It's an absolutely brilliant idea, that, you know.
But value would want us to do the best, so I love that.
Yeah, even when you don't feel like it.
Yeah.
Because there are days you don't feel like it. You know, you've had a row with your kids or something in the morning before you came in. You've had a row with your partner over something or other, you know. So, and it's not possible to leave those things at the door. You can't just leave them there and pick them up on the way out. They're going to affect how you. But if you say your intent will be, I'll be the best I can today, even though it might not be perfect. Yeah.
Very good.
In what we do in human givens therapy, we have a code of ethics that are laid down for best practice. And what we would do is to truly keep ethics alive, rather than it being a document. To keep it alive is reflective practice, and consistently reflecting on each individual person that we encounter in therapy, and being reflective in a way that, can I do better? Did I miss something? Is there something that I didn't ask in that particular session? So that the session just doesn't close when the client leaves the room. The session continues in reflective practice after the session, so that the next time that you would meet a client, in order to keep the ethics alive, is reflective practice time and time and time again. Can I do better? Did I miss something? Is there something that the person has? They're telling me something, but in fact they're trying to hold on to a secondary kind of thing. You know, is it possible to treat somebody for they've come originally with depression, and progress is slow? Asking the question, is the depression being maintained for a secondary reason? Do they need to hold on to that depression because they're getting huge amount of attention at work or at home, in the community? Would the fact giving up a diagnosis be worse off for the person, particularly in emotional and a mental health kind of thing? So for us as human givens therapists, what we do is consistently reflect on every single person to do the best that we possibly can for that person.
That's lovely, Martin. Thank you. Any last thoughts on that question before, because we have two other questions back here.
I guess I'd like to say that yes, you can spend months and months and months developing policies, and eventually you get it up on QPulse or whatever else, but no one has the time to read it. So how you get research into practice is yes, by actively doing it yourself, but equally reflecting on the deaths. What do we do well? What do we not do well? But was that death acceptable to my mother, my brother, to me? And in that, having a review of it, and then it becomes real for everybody of what the policy is, of what the procedure is, and by that, everyone does good practice.
I'd just like to add exactly what Anne said, but also acknowledge what the downside is as well, because it's the downside that people grumble about and talk about and moan and gets in the way of all changes. But it's something about acknowledging that there's going to be pain with change, because people are going to have to change what they do, the way they think, and all the rest of it. And there's something about acknowledging that so that people can feel they've been heard. We heard how important that was this morning. And then they can all help with the implementation.
So we have two questions, and I think Bridget's going to take the handheld mic back. So let's start in the back, Bridget, and then come forward.
I'd just like to say, just to Anne, I suppose, congratulations on your presentation, number one. And number two, I was in awe of what you've achieved in Tallaght Hospital, because we've been running education in relation to end-of-life care, and basically what I have found over the years, that no matter how passionate you are about rolling out the education and saying what end-of-life care really means in action, we sometimes find that people just look for the education when there's a crisis. And so I'm in awe that you have achieved something that I think the rest of the country needs to sort of look at and bring the end-of-life care right into the centre of how we care for people at that process.
Yeah,
so I just want to say thanks.
Very much worthy of applause. That's great, thank you. And one last question, but then I'm going to ask Mary and James to come up, so we've got a last question. Okay. All right, beautiful. That's synergy there. So that's brilliantly done, because what I'm going to do before I hand over the closing to James, I'm just going to ask Mary to tell us a brief bit about her plans for the 10th anniversary conference next year.
Okay, this will be very brief. I know the word finish is on your minds. I just wanted to say that next year the format will be different, because we're going to ask all the facilitators who have presented over the 10 years to contribute some work to a book that we were going to publish and probably launch this time next year. So for those of you that have presented over the years, you will be receiving an email on that. And to say it'll bring us all together, possibly a bigger group of people here, and each presenter will do a 10-minute session on their work that they have presented for this. So we see this as a way of integrating our communities together, and also keeping the value of compassionate networks alive throughout the world, really, because we've had speakers from many, many different countries. So thank you, Sarah, for allowing me to do that. Yeah. Now I have a colleague and friend who has been very generous and waiting all day to come and talk to us. James O'Shea, and James, in a previous life I knew him as doing Katrina's role, which Katrina is doing at the moment in the Regional Centre for Nursing and Midwifery Education. He has gone to bigger and better things nationally now with the mental health. So James has a considered amount of experience, if you read his profile there, in terms of training and education. And one of the reasons I asked James to close the conference today is because he's a mindfulness practitioner and has done many, many programs on it. And during lunch break was introducing me to a concept that he might give you an overview of now in terms of training. It's my great pleasure to introduce James O'Shea.
Thanks, Sarah. Thanks, Mary. I'm certain that Mary asked me to close the conference so that I'd stay in the room all day and I'd listen, because I tend to duck in and out a lot when I'm at conferences, but I've been here all day for two reasons. One was because I had to try and remember what people said, so I could bring the day to a close, but the other one was, I suppose, because it was such a riveting and inspirational conference for me. I'm going to start with a few acknowledgements and thank yous on behalf of Mary and the team and all those who have been involved with this conference and perhaps previous conferences as well. So first to you delegates, it's been a long day, a wonderful day but a long day, so we thank you for your patience, your attention and your participation right up to the bitter end, as they say. I suppose when you go to acknowledge Mary and her contribution to compassionate care and compassionate healthcare in Ireland, it's very difficult to put words on it. I've known Mary probably for 15 years at this stage, and when I was director of the Regional Centre for Nursing and Midwifery Education in the South East, almost every time that Mary came to talk to me, it was in some way connected to bringing compassion into healthcare, in some way connected to bringing compassion, particularly into care of older people. And I suppose she's been a beacon of light for all of the time that I've known her in that. And these conferences have been, I suppose, an outward expression of that. But the work that she's done in the background, herself and her colleagues, Jo and Bridget and others, has been really outstanding. So I think that deserves a very, very solid round of applause. Sarah, your stewardship and your chairmanship was wonderful. Thank you. You're getting us all out on time. And there's a group of other people I'm going to talk, and we might give them all a round of applause at the end, or you'll be here till 7 o'clock. I'd like to thank Baru for their wonderful, beautiful Irish hospitality. Our speakers, our inspirational speakers, who have built on and stood on the shoulders of many wonderful speakers over the years, but I think today has been an absolutely wonderful day, and for me it has been inspirational. And there's also, I suppose, a lot of other people who contribute along the way, and I always kind of like to have a sort of a general thank you in case there's anybody we forget, because sometimes lots of people contribute little bits along the way that are very important in the success of these conferences. So to acknowledge all of those people. Katrina in the Centre for Nursing and Midwifery Education, and Mark in the Nursing and Midwifery Planning and Development Unit, I think for all of these conferences, Mary, that collaborative relationship has been very strong. And also Star Systems for keeping us in touch all day. Thank you for that. I suppose one of the things that are one of a group of people who don't always get thanked at conferences is for the purposes of where we're at today, our service users, our clients, in this case our older people, the people who have taught us and who have inspired us to be able to come and have a conference like this today. So maybe we could just do a collective thank you to all of those people. When I come to conferences, in between the ducking in and out I do, I find, I suppose that, and particularly in recent years, I find that I leave with a lot more questions than answers. Maybe because I'm starting to get older, I'm inclined to reflect a little bit more. So I leave with questions, and I have a few questions in my head today, which I'd like to share with you, and my questions really are my closing comments. And I wondered, as I was sitting this morning, the question that came to mind is, what would it be like? What would it be like if? So what would it be like if we had a healthier, warmer society where our older people are valued and respected? What would it be like if we could harness the wisdom of a lifetime that our older people have accumulated over their years? If we could listen to people's stories in order to promote and indeed evoke healing, hope and optimism, wisdom, learning, deep connection as human beings, and the shedding of our professional facades. What would it be like if we could do what Patrick talked about earlier, if we became, and I hope I can pronounce this properly, discombobulated, I think was what he said. I took it as being disoriented. And I like the notion of being disoriented by a creative spirit, by a different way of seeing the world, something that causes us to think outside of the box, something that causes us to see the world through a new lens, in a new way, something that changes the way we do our business. What would it be like if we measured our care by our ability to reach out from the core of our own humanity to connect with older people as opposed to ticking boxes? If we could support our clients, if we could support our older people in meeting their emotional as well as their physical needs. If we could learn to care for ourselves, if we could learn to have self-compassion in a way that supports us to offer compassionate care to other people. What would it be like if we could pay close attention to the research and implement that in a robust but also in a practical way in our day-to-day care? And finally, what would it be like if we could live and die, and if we could support others to live and die in a supportive and respectful environment? I'm confident that the answers to these questions may help us to do a number of things. They may help us to really listen to the wisdom of our elders. They may help us to respect our elders, to learn from our elders, and to be in a mutual collaborative relationship with our elders that has the potential to heal and to transform us all. So I wish you good luck, I wish you safe home, and I'm hoping that we'll see many of you here next year again for the 10th International Conference on Compassionate Care. Thank you, Mary.